Well, hey everyone, you have been gaslit into believing that sending your children to therapy is actually going to be a helpful thing for them. Therapist Jen here and Dr. Tara Lynn. We are your whistleblowing shrinks, and you are listening to the Gaslit Truth podcast. Welcome.
Welcome. All right, so this is a controversial topic
Yeah, let's
for
do
for
it.
some.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we thought about bringing this in because there's a lot of things in real time that are happening this year. Well, actually, it'd be this year and the end of last year that are just kind of exemplifying this idea that maybe it's not the smartest thing for you to do for the
Yeah.
long term of your child. Now, that in mind, there are some kids that could actually benefit from this. So
Yes.
I'm gonna give a little caveat there.
Yes.
But so you want to talk about what's happening in real time first,
Yeah.
or
Let's talk about real time, what we see coming through the doors of our
Mhm,
therapy practices um, that stems from basically people as adults now trying to move
mhm,
forward in their lives, whether it's they want to get a job, whether they're looking to get benefits, whether this is an insurance thing, whether this is I'd like to get into a branch of the military of some sort.
mhm.
And these are young adults, guys. We're not, we're talking about young adults here, and the inability for them to be able to do those things because of seeing therapists when they were younger and diagnoses that have been put on them.
Yes. So I'm going to add in another layer too, because my kid just graduated college and he's on the job hunt, right? So,
Yeah, that's right.
yes,
You got another
yes,
layer to add.
I do
You
because
sent me
it,
something. Yeah.
yes, because it's very interesting going through the process. So he's going through the process for federal government work. And there's a whole section in there on your mental health history.
Yeah.
And, it says right in there that they could request all of your files, all of your mental health history, all, not just
Yes.
from adulthood, but
Yep.
childhood forward.
Yes.
And even though they say in there, "No, no, we're not gonna use this against you, blah, blah, blah," but really? Are they
Mhm.
really not?
Yeah.
And I said we were talking and he said, "I'm so glad that you never medicated me. I'm so glad that," because I'm like, this would just be another layer of the background investigation process that he would have to fork
Mhm.
over and
Yep.
explain and possibly go to somebody like you to reverse it,
Yes.
because of something that happened when he was 8.
Yes. And I think that that's the scary part about this is
Mhm.
what I'm experiencing in real time is having to undo via psych testing and doing a one hell of a biopsychosocial interview and going
Mhm.
all the way back to when you
She
were
goes all
younger.
in.
It's so it's obnoxious to me, because you've gotta go back to prove that what happened to you in the past is not the current reality that you're operating under. And so it's something as parents to think about, and I know there's people that are gonna be listening to us. The goal of this episode is not to make you feel guilt or shame for taking your kids to see therapists. We are therapists, right? Like, and yet
Mhm.
we're bringing a side to this that you need to be inquisitive about when you have your kids, whether they have behavioral issues when they were are younger, whether the school is saying I just encountered this last week. 6 or 7 year old like kids that are acting in quote unquote neurodivergent fashions, right? And parents being told, look, you might need to screen that child for,
Did they actually
some.
say neurodivergent
Yes.
fashion?
Yes.
What?
Yes, I that word drives me crazy. Listen, there's autism. Like, are we gonna put should we put all these words out there, right? Parents are being told that though, right? By teachers, by providers. Like, your child is rubbing up against a desk. Your child is twirling around outside
Oh
in a
my god.
circle on their tiptoes. Your child is having issues with emotion dysregulation, right? And this has very recently been happening with a few people that I've been working with. And their kids are tiny, right? 6, 7, 8 years
Mhm.
old, and they're in this at this impasse of going, well, maybe we should start doing testing. Maybe we should, the first thing they tell you to do is to call your doctor, right? And the
Oh, ours
doctor
was
will
go to your pediatrician.
yes, go to
Yeah.
the pediatrician.
Mhm.
That's exactly what happens, right? And the
Mhm.
pediatrician then starts saying, okay, well, let's do some assessments. And they'll give an assessment that you do as a parent, an assessment that's done by the teachers. Okay, it can start that way. And the caution is those assessments and those labels fast forward to when your child is 18 years old, 19 years old, right? Wanting to work for the government, wanting to get into the military, coming off of your insurance and looking to get benefits, looking to get life insurance. These labels, these histories, even though the symptoms haven't been present for 10 years, 15 years for some of these people,
Mhm.
um, they matter.
Mhm.
They matter, and in the wrong way. I mean, as the
In
person
all the
doing
wrong
these
ways.
psych testing,
Mhm.
I can tell you it matters in all the wrong ways. I don't really give a shit what was going on with your kid when you were younger. They do, but I wanna look at the last couple years of your life and just tell me how you've been doing.
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
tell me about your functioning in your real world stuff, and that is a great picture that kinda negates this idea of I'm gonna go back to that label because that label mattered because we gave you ADHD when you were 7 and we medicated you for, like, 3 years,
Right.
and that it's almost a moot point,
Mhm.
and I know I'm saying this, like, really, like, loose, like, bold with this statement, like, it fucking doesn't matter. It doesn't
How
matter.
did we get to this point that what was going on with you in your childhood should automatically be pulled forward into your
Yes,
adulthood
into your
as a
adulthood.
diagnostic label? And the same thing happened to my daughter. So she went through some stuff in 5th grade,
Mhm.
and so when she had her baby, she just disclosed this to me. She goes, when she had her baby 4 years ago, at the OB's office, in her chart said history of depression, because when she was in 5th grade, so we had moved here in 5th grade, so she was going
Yeah,
through some adjustment stuff and
yep,
saw a therapist and all these things, and
yep,
that was in her chart, and I said to her, I said, "Tell them to get that out of your chart." I said, "That was in childhood. That
yeah,
was 5th grade." And she goes,
yep,
"I don't know how to get that out of my chart." And she's a nurse. She goes, "I don't know how to do it." I said, "Have them write a note about it or something.
yeah,
Like, this is not appropriate."
mhm,
And it's like, she goes, "It was right there in my OB's office, that history
yep,
of depression." And I was like, wow, because that takes
yep,
no context into consideration, you know?
mhm,
History of depression, of adjustment, because just moved here in 5th
yeah,
grade and having social interaction issues with peers. Like,
yes,
that makes sense to me in 5th grade, not
yes,
just now you've been labeled and that label now is yours forever, you know? And
right,
so that makes me feel like shit, actually, that she had
mhm,
that and carried forward because, as a concerned parent, again, getting the help that they needed,
mhm,
now is it didn't for her, but it could have, if sh depending
yes,
upon where she went,
right,
impacted her in her
right,
future. For
and
my
I
son, 100% impact,
yes.
100%.
And I
Mhm,
think that kids who see therapists, right? And we've got a research article that
mhm.
Terry's going to talk a little bit about here. And I say Terry because I only had like 14 seconds to read it. And she sends me this fantastic stuff, and I'm like,
It's
"Brrr,
just a
okay, wait, yeah,
summary,
right,
it's not really
yeah,
the actual
okay, but
research, but the problem, I'm just gonna reiterate here, the problem isn't always going to therapy. Sometimes the
no,
problem is the diagnostics that are required to go to therapy,
yes,
and those get carried with. I think there should be something that says, you don't have to diagnose a child. You don't have to diagnose a child with a major mental health disorder,
yep,
or when they are 18, their childhood diagnosis is meaningless and they need to be reassessed now in
reevaluated,
adulthood.
yes,
Yes,
or even
exactly.
yes, either when you're 18 or even if you're 30 and you're trying to do this, like, let's go back to, I don't know, mid-20s when your central
Yeah.
nervous system was finally developed.
Mhm.
Okay, then let's look at how life started functioning at
Right.
that point, because
Or just a
for
little bit of context, like a little bit
something
of what was happening, you know?
something.
Mhm.
I think that the article we had a Mad in America like context article here that
Mhm.
we pulled up. It talked about this idea of kids and how honest they are in psychotherapy. Um,
Well, and
with
whether or not they believe it was helpful or hurtful to
yes,
them,
yes,
which is
yes,
interesting because, it was a small study, just so everybody knows. I think there was less than 50 participants.
yep. It was tiny.
45. There was 45 participants in this. So it was small, but
Yep.
it's one of these studies that just makes you kinda go, Hmm," like,
Hmm.
this is really interesting. So I wanted to read some of the stats here that they, and of course, they're doing percentages.
Yep.
but anyway. So these were surveys. 67.7 of the participants reported experiencing at least one negative effect of their psychotherapy. This is in their childhood. Among them, 37.8% experienced increased stress, with 20% attributing it to their therapy.
Sure.
Likewise, 38.8% reported an increase in unpleasant memories, with 29.8% attributing it to psychotherapy. In addition, 31.1 experienced an increased perception that their problem would not improve. That's
Mm.
interesting to me. 31% said that their
They believe
problem
it
would
won't
not improve.
won't
They would
help
believe that it
anyways.
would
Yeah.
not. And that's because of therapists saying,
Right.
"What well, you're depressed now, so you're just gonna be battling this for the rest of your life." Some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Another negative effect reported was decreased self-esteem.
Oh, see, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
And study authors have noted that while increased symptoms such as anxiety, sadness, and sleep problems were the most commonly reported negative effects of therapy, the increased perception that the problem would not improve was rated as the most severe. So
Yeah.
so you're going in there and you're making your anxiety and depression worse, and also establishing a sense of hopelessness in childhood. And
Mhm.
I view childhood as a very transient time. Like,
Mhm.
you are changing and growing and developing, and
Yep.
new peer groups and new interests, all these things. Imagine going to a therapist and feeling now like you are stuck like this forever, you know?
Mhm.
There's some other research. Do you remember the one we talked about with DBT and teens making relationships with parents worse?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, because sometimes I think, and I'm not a child therapist. I used to do therapy with, like, teenagers and things like that, but
Yep.
children were never my jam. I stayed away from them because I did so many years of daycare that I was just not interested in working with young children anymore. Um, but there's enough, like, I think about, like, Dr. Phil always said, as a parent, you're taking your child to the therapeutic altar. Something's wrong with my child.
And that's how they view it too. So
Yes.
what's very interesting is kids in general, and
Mhm,
that's a blanket statement, but they view it that way.
mhm,
I have brought this up even with my kids and, going to talk to somebody, and that is just like even to go see the school counselor, it's
mhm,
gotta be done in an incognito fashion. Meaning you, like, don't get up in the middle of class and everybody sees you and you go walk out and then they see you
mhm.
come back out of the counseling office. Like, it's viewed, and maybe this is like a cultural thing as well. I mean, there's factors that go into why kids would believe that doing this isn't super helpful for them, and I can see why in the school it could be hard because all your peers are watching you go walk into the school counselor's office, right? So
Well, we go
I
to the doctor. I mean, on a basic
you know
level, you go to the doctor when something's wrong with you. Like, you go to the pediatrician when you have an ear infection,
Correct.
there's
It's the
something
same,
wrong with
yes.
you. Right,
That's
it's so
exactly
that's
what it is. It's what it
right,
is,
like,
and
I
even
gotta go to this person
yes,
because there's something wrong with me,
yes.
even though it might be a friend relationship thing, it might be stress at
Yep.
school, it could be something at
They
home,
don't but they
you
haven't
know?
lived enough life to understand, like, as adults, we
Mhm.
can go and see a therapist and we can go, "I know," well, for some of us, for some of us, we still think that we're messed up and something's wrong with us, but for most of us, we've lived enough life to understand that, like, I can work through this. Someone can
Yeah,
help me work through this. This is not a characterological flaw that I was born with and I'm fucked with forever, which again, some people do believe that. But kids haven't lived enough life to understand that the perception of reality is very black and white when it comes to some of that. Like,
yeah,
so they go into this not wanting to do it most of the time, but their judgments of it are very flooded of how there's something wrong with them that then they need to go and see somebody. So
mhm.
then you put them in a situation like that where it could decrease self esteem, could create more anxiousness for them, could actually create more social problems for them in some
Well,
ways
and I
too.
think that's because when you go to therapy, especially as a young child, you're talking about all the bad shit
You
that's
are. Yeah, I
happened,
was Jen,
you
tell me
know?
about your parents' divorce.
Right,
Like, and I was like,
exactly.
"Mhm,
Mhm.
yep."
Yep.
And
This
yeah,
is what happened, right?
and
Mhm.
and yes, and so you don't, like, sit through it. I mean, you're so simplistic as a child talking your way
Right.
through it, but The point of
It's creating that,
yes, is there a
um
narrative this is creating that wasn't really fucking there in the first place? And you were just like, "Well,
right.
yeah, I mean,
Oh, wow, that
my
is
parents got
bad. My
divorced."
parents, even though they were divorced when I was 2 and I
Yes.
didn't know, that was the worst time of my life. It was so bad. I'm like, "You didn't know anything else." Like
And I know that I know that therapy can be helpful for kids. We
mhm,
are bringing this up from a lens of more of just so you know, it's not as though it stops. The idea of I went to therapy stops when your child stops therapy.
mhm,
Records are very powerful.
mhm.
Um, super, super powerful. Um,
There was this
scary
psychiatrist
powerful.
there was this psychiatrist that I was watching on, some social media channel, and, he was interesting, and he worked with children, and he was doing a video of him taking diagnoses off charts, okay? So he was taking them off the chart, and I
Uh-huh.
kept thinking, I mean, that's cool and everything, but it doesn't really take it off the chart, you
Right.
know? Like,
Yep.
you're saying it's not gonna be in my chart, but that doesn't mean it wasn't historic, and so
Yep.
when you play the tape forward for your child and what you want for them and what they want from themselves, you have no idea when they're 6 what they're gonna wanna do when
No.
they're 20.
No.
You know, but even that psychiatrist was trying to do the right thing by not having a diagnosis or these hardcore diagnoses on
Mhm.
there, but it's still in your chart. It's still in your
It
history.
is.
It still lives there. It's still
Yeah.
on an insurance report. It's still everywhere.
Yes.
And, you know, and even still, like, it did when I was thinking about the checklist for the federal government, it didn't say, um, "Do you have a diagnosis or not?" I mean, it did say that, but it said, "If have you ever been to inpatient, a therapist?" Like, it listed out, "Have you ever been to see these people?" So even if you were to go somewhere, pay privately, and not get a diagnosis, you'd still have to say
You still have
yes.
to check that box.
You still have to
Yes.
check the box, and they still
Yep.
want the records, and
Yes.
so that doesn't even save you,
No.
from that, you know? Did the therapist would be able to say, "Did you diagnose them?" "No." You know? Perhaps, you know, that therapist did not if you paid privately.
Yeah.
I
Which
mean, that's what
is an option, guys, like, just
it
so
is an
you're
option.
aware,
Mhm.
you can pay privately, you can take your child and go pay privately somewhere and not run your
Yes.
insurance, eat the
Mhm.
out-of-pocket cost of what it's gonna cost,
And not
and
have a
have
diagnosis.
a conversation with that therapist about, "Do not diagnose my child." You can do that.
Yes.
In fact, guys, you can do that as adults too. I have
Yeah.
several clients right now that pay privately because they don't want
One
me to
and it
submit to
nope,
insurance. Insurance
nope.
requires that we label somebody,
Mhm.
from a diagnostic, standpoint. We have to.
And there'll be
We
some therapists that'll be
Yeah.
like, "Well, you know, you could do adjustment disorder and that blah, blah." It doesn't matter, that's
Yep.
still a diagnosis, like, it's
Correct.
still
The
there, you
clients that
know?
I am trying to undo their diagnoses on have adjustment disorders with depression and anxiety, or like explosive disorders as a child when they were 8 years old. The things we don't even like call anymore, right? Like
Right.
they matter. And it doesn't say major depression, doesn't say schizophrenia, doesn't say attention
Mhm.
deficit disorder, doesn't say bipolar disorder. None of that. None
I
of
do
that,
remember
guys.
that one, it said adjustment disorder, I'm like,
Yeah.
you have to go through a huge psych eval, like a renew to get rid of an adjustment disorder,
Yep.
which technically is supposed to fall off after
Fall
6
off.
months
Yes,
anyway, you
unless
know,
you
but it
continue to
doesn't.
see somebody and you continue to
Right.
update it, right? Like, once you're done,
Exactly.
it's because
Mhm.
you need to, like, adjust to a circumstance that's happening in your life,
Correct.
and
Correct.
so those it doesn't what these diagnoses don't take into account that carry with you as you get older, and this happens to us as adults too, is doesn't take into account any of the life changes that have happened from each
Yeah.
time that diagnosis maybe stops because you stop seeing a provider, and then 5 years later you go see somebody again. Okay,
Mhm.
that diagnosis doesn't just poo poo go off of your chart, and it's that same way for your kids. So, and they're changing so much. I mean, not like we aren't as adults, but every single week and month that they live, you could assess their mental health on a Monday, and 30 days later, it is vastly different.
Different.
Just like
Mhm.
women going through menopause, it's the same
Yeah.
damn thing. Like, you
Yeah.
ask me 1 month and then you assess 45 days later, it could be night and day.
Mhm.
And that's what's happening with our kids is they are interacting and learning how to interact with the environment. The nervous systems are changing. Everything bounces off of them.
Hormones are changing at a
Hormones
rapid
change.
pace. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
everything.
Mhm.
Like free radicals, they may or may not take in the Lyme disease they could
Mhm.
have from being bit by a tick, and all of a sudden there's these autoimmune issues that they have, and it looks like you've
Mhm.
got obsessive compulsive disorder, when in
Right.
reality you've got PADS, right? Like
Right.
there's so many pieces to this. But
I think for kids,
you
it's
know,
almost worse than it is for
I
adults,
think so too.
as far as us not digging any deeper than this is
Yeah,
just a mental health problem. I
I
really
think so too.
do.
I
And
think so
maybe
too.
that's because a kid doesn't know to ask for those things, whereas some adults do, but I really think that kids are being slapped with labels, and not look any deeper. Like,
Yeah.
if your kid suddenly changes, like, there's a sudden change,
Yep.
there's a reason for that sudden change. It could be a lot of things, the things that Jen just mentioned. It could be, your daughter's getting her period soon,
Mhm. Mhm.
hormonally changing, or your son is hitting puberty right now. Like,
Yes.
there's so many things, and just the social stuff,
Yep.
with kids is changing all the time. So I think the message here is to uncover everything else first, you
As a
know?
parent too, right? Like, people say, "Well,
Mhm.
what am I supposed to do?" Like, what
There's
and
so much
and
pressure, by the way.
there's so much pressure, and I'm in it, right? I've got a teenager right
Mhm.
now and
I've
one
been there.
who yeah,
Mhm.
I'm in it, and I will sit there and go through my mind back and forth in this, and the pressure to go, "Okay, it would be good if I think if you had somebody to talk to," because of course nobody wants to talk to me, like, in my household,
Mhm.
because they're like, "Stop, you're just therapizing and it's obnoxious, blah, blah, blah."
There.
My spouse says that, my kids say
I
that,
get that. I got that from my kids all the time.
and
"Would you
that's
stop being
fine.
a therapist?"
Yeah,
I'm like,
and
"I'm
that's
just listening
fine.
to you. That's it. I'm
Yeah.
just listening." But yeah.
And I'm okay with
Mhm.
that, but parents will ask, like, "Well, what should I do?" And in my mind, there's lots of alternatives. Is it gonna be helpful for your kid to see a therapist? Maybe. So as a
Maybe.
parent, you can ask those questions about, how do they get diagnosed? Is there a way around this, right? I don't want these labels
Mhm.
put on my children. Um, Instead of a therapist, why not go and look for a coach?
Yeah.
And go see a coach. Coaches
Yep.
are phenomenal. We have
Some,
had
not all, but the
several
same with
coaches
therapists too, by the way.
We've
Mhm.
had several coaches on this show, like Brianna
Mhm.
Cohen is one that comes to mind, right?
Yep.
Like see if there are coaching services that might be a little bit more beneficial.
Mhm.
Start to look
And
at
less
like
long-term
alternate
damning
options.
less long-term
Yes.
damning. The other
Yeah.
thing I think about with therapists too is, would therapists please stop pushing kids to be medicated? Like, it's like you start in therapy, and the next thing you know, you're on medications. And the next thing you know, you're medicating yourself through puberty, through social interactions, through life,
Yep.
like Jen, like Brooke that's been on here, like all these people, like,
Mhm.
oh gosh, I forgot the name, the anxiety, shoot, the
Kevin.
last Kevin, sorry,
Kevin
Kevin.
Gunderson.
Kevin Gunderson, like, medicating your way through life and now trying to live as an adult, right? Without having then all the skill sets that you learn just by being. Like, we don't
Yeah.
have to learn skill sets from somebody teaching us. We learn skill sets just by being and moving through our lives and trial and error and all of these
It's
things, you
like,
know?
who's more uncomfortable? Like, when my kids are going through this shit, I know they're uncomfortable,
I'm
but
more uncomfortable,
I'm
I
more
think.
uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
I want to fix this. I want to put
Mhm.
a intervention on this, and I have to pull as a parent, pull yourself back from that, like, reach out, talk to other parents, like,
Mhm.
pull yourself back a little bit from it because, yes, we don't wanna see our kids go through that. However, there's a lot of long-term damage that can happen, um, if we intervene and put them in that way. And
Yes.
I gotta jump. You just said something that you and I had a conversation about this. And when you just did this call to action for therapists to stop saying, put the kid on meds, I recommend maybe meds, I support all the meds. As a therapist out there, we are taught that adding medications is
It's
like the
gold
gold
standard.
standard. It's gold
Mm.
standard, right? Here we go. Yep, this is what you do. You don't
Yep.
silo yourself in your intervention. You bring in
Mhm.
psychiatry. Like
More
that's
supports,
more
more
supports. We're
supports.
constantly taught that. Like that is
Mhm.
the textbook thing we are taught. Terry and I are here to throw an alternate idea out at anybody who is even a child therapist right now, at the idea that what if that line of thinking is wrong?
Mhm.
What if the way that you were educated is actually incorrect and that the line of thinking should be medications are the last,
Last.
last intervention? And this is after you've done everything else.
Mhm.
Take a lens of that for just a minute, because we are changing the biology of these children. We are creating synthetic brain injuries in
Yep.
these children that were never there. We are stunting, stimulating their nervous
Mm.
systems. Okay.
Mhm.
We are creating medical diagnoses such as thyroid problems, Graves' disease, that did not exist
Mhm.
for these children. Okay. And we're taught opposite of
Acne.
that.
Let's talk about acne for a
Oh,
second.
fuck. Story of my life. Jesus
Yes.
Christ.
Like, we the side
I
effects
can't.
are astounding, but again, like we've talked about a million times on this show, side effects are just new symptoms emerging, you're getting worse.
Yes.
How can that be? You just gave me a medication that is supposed to be solving this problem.
Yep.
Suddenly I'm getting worse. Suddenly I have all these other health-related things, and nobody goes back and says, "Maybe it's the medication." Nobody
Yes.
goes back and says that, and with kids particularly, one of the biggest things you see in kids when they're medicated is aggressive behavior,
Yep.
outbursts, all these
Yep.
things, and then the next thing you know, they have a new med. Now they have an antipsychotic because they're
Yes.
out of their minds,
Yes.
and now they have a sleep aid because they can't go to sleep at night because
That's
that
that's
stimulant
what we see
happens,
with a lot of the
all of it.
ADHD meds, right? Like, and
Mhm.
yep, you might actually be focusing just a little bit better now, and you can sit still in the classroom. You're not flipping a chair when you get angry, right? You're not
Right.
verbally bursting things out. You're
Mhm.
not having this hyperactivity that's a constant issue, right?
Maybe you are because that
But
med is not right for you, you
right,
know?
and then you go on the
Mhm.
medications and
Oh.
you do see a difference in your kid. And
Mhm.
you do start to see, oh, they can sit still longer. Okay, they're 8.
Mhm.
Is that a good thing? Okay. Oh, well, all of a sudden now they're having changes in their sleep habits, or they're starting to develop these tics or these like OCD
Mhm.
type things that they didn't have before. So I went from the kid that's like dancing in outfield and doing circles constantly and needing to be extra stimulated to being numbed out, and is kind of like, I don't know, they all of a sudden are doing these repetitive counting behaviors, and they have these tick behaviors that show up.
But
But
they can concentrate in school, so it's
but they
okay.
can
We're gonna
right,
put another med on it. Mhm.
right. And so then we medicate that, right? So it's and that is what's happening in the body, everybody. That's what's happening to the kids, is the natural course of developing and getting through these physiological things that are happening. We stunted it. We stopped it. We retrained, right? Redid what the brain is doing with the drugs, and is actually changing the trajectory then of how they develop, their nervous systems develop across the board. And that runs our whole body. That's
Yeah. I wanna just bring
head
in
to toe.
something, and it's mom guilt and shame, and I'm bringing this in because I think it's an important piece of this conversation because I'm saying moms because moms are usually the one in charge of mental well-being and healthcare for their kids.
Yeah.
Not that dads are not, but mostly moms are making those appointments, taking your kids there. There is a tremendous amount of pressure, of mom guilt if you're not doing something, right? And shame if your child continues to act out in school. Like, there's so much, and I know this because I was one of those moms. Like, the amount
Yeah.
of pressure that was put on me to medicate my kid was amazing. It was astounding.
Yeah.
To the point where the principal looked at me and said, "You need to make an appointment with a pediatrician so they can get on meds." And I said, "You do not know who you're talking to." That's what I said. And
Right.
this was even before I am who I am today. Like, this
Yeah.
was, years ago. And I'm like, even then, intuitively, I knew that I wasn't going to be medicating my young child at the time.
Yep.
I think 7. I think it was 7. She
Yeah.
was 7. And but the immense pressure that you get from all angles to be a good mom, you
Mhm.
know, to your child, to make sure that you medicate them. It was interesting because when I was, I'm going to loosely call this research for this episode because I didn't do much, but Reddit. So I went to Reddit, and one of the things about the subject line on Reddit was, can you turn someone in to the police if they refuse to medicate their child for mental health stuff? And I'm like,
Mm,
because they're viewing it as like, if you refuse to provide healthcare to your child, CPS can be called on you. Can
yes.
you do the same thing for somebody who is refusing to
Oh,
medicate their child's mental health problems? And I'm like, that is a scary fucking place to be.
yeah,
If
that's
your
not smart.
neighbor can say, you're not medicating your child, I'm going to turn CPS on you, or if that becomes a thing and then the school can turn you into CPS
That's
for
what I
not
was thinking, the schools,
providing,
yeah. Mhm.
yes, the healthcare for your kid, the way you see fit. And I'm like, holy shit, this is a
Yes.
slippery slope of a conversation
All
because
I see is medicating, like, into compliance. Like, in
yes.
in my brain as I see these bulb, the flashing bulbs on the
Mhm.
you know, on the like, cross the mountains in LA, right? We've got our big billboards, right? That's all I see is medicating them into compliance so that they can be that kid that matches up to all of those other kids.
Mhm.
Right? Okay, now you fit. Now you fit in here.
Mhm.
And is that the approach we wanna take? Does that make sense for me and for my child? Is that what I want? Are there other interventions that I haven't tried, such as really truly looking at revamping their nutrition and taking a
Mhm.
really good hard look at like how much time they're spending doing activities that may not be helpful for promoting and optimizing the brain and the body, right?
Yeah.
Like there are so many options we can look at that aren't just medication and therapy.
Mhm.
They
For
exist.
well, and I think one of the issues, and I can go back into my own experience for this, was learning deeply that the school system isn't the place that's gonna help your kid the most because they're just not equipped, like, you can't. So, my kid was in supports for math and reading for a very long time, and it was doing nothing. So, as a parent, I had to go out and hire experts to help him get through that time of his life, and then
Yep.
suddenly everything clicked and he was good to go, and he's
Mhm.
living a very productive young adult life right now, right? So, but if I would have changed course on that early or just
Yep.
allowed things to happen, I can't even imagine what would have happened now,
Just
right?
because
Like,
your kid doesn't fit the standard timeline of
we talk
everybody
about
else.
neurodivergence, like, I
Yep.
view this as, like, just being different is okay, right? Like, being not the same as everyone
Mhm.
else is okay,
Yeah.
but we only reward sameness.
Yes.
Sameness is rewarded. If you're sitting in your chair, that's rewarding.
Yep.
We don't reward differences. And I'm not talking about, the kid who's fighting all the time. I'm talking about the
Mhm.
kid who's slow to tie their shoes. That was the biggest complaint with my kid. I'm like, give me some examples of what you see. Well, when it's time to go outside, he's very slow to tie his shoes. And I'm like, oh, all right.
Yep.
And so then we would send him in no tie shoes, like, no tie shoes. I'm like, "Just slide these suckers on
Yep.
and get outside." Well, nope, he's gotta have tie on shoes, and I was
Because
like,
developmentally, age
yes,
that's where he should be
yes,
with all the other
exactly.
kids. You are
Yep,
7
and
years old, you should be tying your fucking
yep,
shoes, right? Like,
yep, and I
we get
was
that.
like
Yep.
I was like, "You
Mhm.
cannot win. You can't
Yep.
win," like, he was
Mhm.
set up to fail in those situations, right? So, but I'll never forget that. I'm like, "He's slow to tie his shoe."
Mhm.
Get bent. What? Like, that's the biggest problem? And I was just like, "What the fuck?" Anyway, but do you know how many meetings we had about that stupid shit? Like, it was so
Mhm.
bad, and I'm like, "This is why other kids can't get the help that they need because they're focusing on my kid who's slow to tie his fucking shoe."
Yeah.
Like, it was
Yep.
so dumb. You wanna know how I solved that? This is really funny. I wanna tell you how I solved it because I think it's hilarious. Because he's just got 2 older sisters. He's the youngest of 3, and that's part of it too, is like, he's the youngest of 3, whatever.
Yeah.
And, he refused to learn how to tie his shoes. So this is where we're at. He refused to learn how to tie his shoes. And so I looked at his sister and I said, "I will give whichever one of you $50 if you will teach him how to tie his shoe, like right now." And he looked at me and he goes, "Well, what if I did it myself? Will you give me 50 bucks?" I said, "Sure."
Hell yeah.
What did that little shit do? In 24 hours,
He's so
learned how to
smart.
tie his
This is
goddamn
why he
shoe.
works for the
Exactly.
government now, because he's so
Exactly.
smart. Like those antisocial traits right there,
Yeah,
hell yeah.
right? Pathologized to the max, you
Yep,
know?
right there. Look
Right.
at
But
life
it was
life
it was at that
skill life
moment,
skill,
yeah.
by the way. fucking
Right,
life skill, like,
right.
developing at age 7 right there.
Right, but it was at that moment that I was like, "Yeah, yeah, l like, Matt, I need to medicate you now." Mostly, I just need to incentivize you to do the thing that you need to do, but,
Yes.
I feel like in today's world, like, we go to well, and I think it's also a fear-based situation too, because if you don't
Yeah,
medicate, they're gonna end their lives, and I'm like, that rhetoric needs to change, it needs to stop. It needs to be not the reason why we guilt and shame moms into,
yep,
medicating their kid because it's just not the truth,
yep.
and as a matter of fact, the truth is more on the black box warning, the more you medicate, the more they will end
More
their lives.
likelihood that there will be, yep,
Yes.
suicidal issues,
Yes,
yes. And what yeah,
exactly.
and so when you wrap this whole context into, like, what we're talking about here, I think part of the message is as parents, we receive a lot of shame talk. Like that is
Mhm,
something that we get a ton of. The
mhm.
language that's given to us as parents from whether it's from providers, whether it's even from therapists, whether it's from staff at the schools, it can be very manipulative. And so
Mhm.
it's about really just sitting back and trying to figure out what is best for your kid, knowing that if you're going to bring interventions in, such as seeing a child therapist, be cautious with that, be inquisitive about other options, um, because that does stay with your kids. And it stays with them for a very, very, very long time. And now, and then as adults, they have to come to people like me or Terry, and we have to do full psych assessments to
Go
try
to
to
Jen,
say,
she's way better at
listen,
it than me, but any
just and it's but it's part of the whole story. And usually when you look back through these records, okay,
Mhm.
you see the events happening in their lives that caused this. There was a trauma at age 8. There was a separation. There was some major social issues happening in school. There
Mhm.
was some bullying. Like you start to look at the records from the school counselors and go, "Well, yeah, this is what was going on in your life.
Stuff makes
No
sense.
wonder no wonder you were
Mhm.
acting out, right?"
Mhm.
And for some it's to a very extreme level. But if any provider or therapist says to you, "This is an issue with your kid's brain," run.
Run away fast.
Find somebody else. Find
Yep.
somebody else who is willing to look at this differently because you have the ability to do that. The shame language tells you no, the mom guilt tells you no, but
Mhm.
that's not factual. That guilt is not factual at all, actually.
Don't allow
Find
anybody to
find
guilt or
something
shame
else.
you into doing this,
Nope.
that's the biggest thing, like,
Yes.
as soon as you hear that manipulative language, you need to
Yep.
go.
Yep, there are
Mhm.
so many alternate providers out there who do so much holistic stuff that could
Mhm.
really be even more beneficial for your child. Um, and get curious about it because it is out there. Are your doctors or even some of your therapists going to say that to you? No, most of them
Mm-mm.
don't, right? But we will.
Yeah, we will for sure. Yeah, well, well, now I'm just worried, because I'm a grandma now, so I'm just worried about her, like, I'm like, "Oh, no," make
It
sure we
never
don't go down that
stops,
route.
right? It never
Yes.
stops. Like
No, I know, it
once a
doesn't
mom, always a
stop.
mom.
I know. So, at least my older kids are a little bit more well-versed in this stuff now that I don't have to worry about it, but it
Yeah.
was tough. It was such a hard time.
Yep.
The guilt, the shame, and you gotta be a feisty motherfucker to stand up
You
for all
gotta
of
be
that.
tenacious as fuck
Mhm.
to go,
Yep.
"Okay, yep, nope, nope, let's try something else." And then you also have to really step back and go, "Who is having the biggest issue with this? Is it
Mhm.
my child? Is it me? Is it the
Right.
school?" Like, who actually has the biggest issue with all of it?
Do you wanna
Be
know I would
you know
just to quickly share, it
Yeah.
turned out that this was an elementary school. It turned out that that elementary school had the most medicated kids for
Mm,
ADHD in the entire district, and that was all from the principal, and I was like, "Holy
there you
shit.
go.
This is
Yep,
incredible." Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, anyway. So, I think we're gonna wrap it up there, huh?
I think that's probably a good spot.
Or I could go on for days.
I know.
Anyway, that's another episode of the Gaslit Truth podcast. Please feel free to like, comment, follow, share, subscribe, do all the things. Give us only what is it, 5 stars, 4 whatever,
Give us
the
all the
highest
stars.
amount of stars.
Give
Give
us
us
the things.
all the stars. If you're not going to give us stars, don't leave a review. Thank you very much. And if you want to send your Gaslit Truth stories to us, please send them to us at the Gaslit Truth podcast at gmail.com. Also, if you know somebody that would be a really good guest on the show that is doing some really interesting things in the field of mental health, send us their name too, because we would love to get them on. So that's a wrap of the Gaslit Truth podcast for today. See ya.